Michael Wargo, team pilot with Hobbyking and Precision Aerobatics, and today we're going to discuss practice without actually practicing. I do want to go on record as saying I am a huge proponent of practice. I do practice what I do when I fly. I don't do it as much lately, and I really enjoy days out the field by myself where I can just practice things to try and kind of perfect them. Most of you know I'm involved in professional golf, and I'm a pianist, and all those things involved practice, and they are 100% how I got proficient at my craft. In this case, though, I do realize that most pilots, number one, do not want to practice. Number two, they just don't see the value in it because they don't care if they progress at any great level. They just want to be a bit more proficient at what they do. There are a few things that I'm going to number and list that I think are the top 5 things that you can do to improve and practice without actually practicing. So here's what they are. First, establish in your mind exactly how you're going to take off. Establish your first turnout and maneuver in the first part of your little sequence. Number one, that makes you feel very confident. It makes you look a lot better when you fly. And it gives you a starting point and some markers to hit when you take off. And also I suggest that you really focus hard on hitting the same markers when you land to make sure your landings always look good. Depending on the aircraft, the markers might be a little bit different. I mean, from an aerobatic plane to a jet aircraft. But the bottom line is, when you are taking off and landing, I'd suggest you do a very similar takeoff and try and be accurate with it instead of just lifting off the ground and turning away. When I discuss taking off, this is what I mean. A nice, deliberate, let it lift off, fly out straight, and then make a nice, deliberate turn out. It looks really nice, and it's something, if you practice, it helps you become a better pilot. Now this, of course, is an example of a takeoff being very deliberate, very planned. And as you can see, I'm starting to go into my first maneuver. I did a little half of an 8-point roll there. And as I come back down the line, this is something that was planned. It's just maybe, even if this is the only thing I planned for the whole routine, at least I get to practice something and do it every time, so I get maybe a little lower, a little nicer, a little smoother. And in this case, I go up and do a couple-point roll up, and everything I did tried to look deliberate for this opening sequence. And of course, for you advanced pilots, your opening takeoff doesn't have to be, a nice low and slow. This, you could see I went straight up and started into an aerobatic maneuver. But you can do anything as long as you repeat it and practice it. Now, my biggest pet peeve when I watch people fly is they leave the ground and they immediately just start turning around, and then they'll fly the circuit a little bit. And just things like that, and the flying never looks good, and it's very purposeless. I've always been a proponent of flying with purpose. That means doing very specific things in the air, pointing the airplane at a specific spot and guiding the airplane, being ahead of the aircraft. Don't let it fly you, you have to fly it. Being reactive when you fly has a lot of disadvantages. Suggestion number 2 for practice without actually practicing is when you go up and fly, always make very long, deliberate passes. If you like to make low passes down the runway, hit your marks. And as you're coming in, be very deliberate where you go. If you're capable of flying a foot off the ground, good on you, and fly a foot off the ground, but make sure it's nice and long, and make sure you go one end of the runway to the other. Make it very deliberate. You'll just get better and better and better at it. And if you can fly 5 feet or 8 feet off the ground, just do it. Make sure it's nice and long and straight. If those passes are inverted passes, knife edge passes, whatever it is, long and deliberate, and guide them exactly where you want the plane to be. That is practice. Okay, number 3. We all have favorite maneuvers that we like to do, whether it's a rolling harrier or whether it's some nice tumbling maneuvers or whatever it is. The way to practice it is, especially if you're working on something at the time, to put that 2 or 3 times in whatever you're doing and hit that favorite maneuver. But again, always try and hit a very specific mark. Whether it's a tumbling exercise and as you're falling, there's a certain place you like to come out of it. Practice it, get a little lower. Always be working on something while you're flying. It not only helps you become a better pilot, but it keeps your flights more interesting. For anything to hold my interest, I kind of have to be working on something. Just flying around aimlessly doesn't thrill me as much as it does a lot of people. I like to be working on things. So when I do fly, and I am trying to practice a little bit, I really enjoy seeing an improvement from one flight to the next. Practice without practicing again. Try one new thing every time you go up. Doesn't matter what it is. Maybe you're not used to knife edging or anything like that. Turn the plane on its side, give it a shot. Practicing without practicing is really a concept of making sure when you do have the plane in the air, you're actually doing something and not just randomly guiding it around in the sky. Sure, not every flight can do that. Maiden flights are different and all these kind of things. But especially if you're by yourself, I suggest if the plane leaves the ground and you're flying around, there's a few things that you should be rehearsing and practicing every time you fly. One is, like I said, very deliberate passes. The other is, making sure you're flying a little bit of a routine, at least part of your flight. I do fly, especially with jets and things like that. I do fly some pretty specific routines, and they get better. They get better every time I do it. And I think if you, before you leave the ground, have some idea of what you're going to do, then you are going to be, again, putting in the time into the maneuvers, into flying straight, into flying smoothly, and that is always beneficial. Tip number 5. I think this is the most important one, because ultimately what this tip does is it will always make you a better pilot. You will always emerge a little tiny bit better than you were before, and that is fly smoothly. Make smooth turns, very smooth turns, very deliberate turns, and don't make really hard turns. Make the plane look good. That's important. Make the aircraft look good. Finally, we want to look smooth. Make every turn and everything you do smooth and deliberate. That's the best tip of all. If you do that every flight, you will always get better. This whole video is about just intentionally doing things to make yourself better. Put in a little bit of time each flight, even if you're just messing around, to rehearsing something and making it a little bit better. No matter how complicated or crazy of maneuvers, practicing makes perfect.